Chapter 1152 break week over with some nice timing as well, since the anime is going on break this week with a recap episode airing instead, but it's going strong. These backstory episodes have been very good. And on the topic of the anime, the Wit Studio remake has finally gotten an update, although not a big one and probably not what people want to hear because progress has been slow. So on one hand you could say they're taking their time to make sure they do it right, while on the other hand that does mean a longer wait until it is ready. No problem however, because this is One Piece and there's so much stuff to consume. So speaking of which, and speaking of flashbacks also, with all the chaos of Emu making a move and the current state of Elbaph, even though we are moving away from that, I'd say this chapter is just as good if not better than those previous ones. Cover story: remember when Yamato left Udon, she carried a Kasa hat given to her by Tama which was to be delivered to Kawamatsu. Here we see that hat reaching him in Hakumai, so that's the second successful delivery of a precious object, I guess. Kawamatsu is also the new daimyo of Hakumai, so I can only assume Kiku will be the daimyo of Ringo. Let's have Kawamatsu give Yamato something else to carry all the way to the capital, or maybe give it to Kiku, just carry on the trend, something to follow in the meantime while we wait, and I'll keep saying this with each new volume of the cover story, while we wait for the major incident that turns things on its head. Now for the main chapter. Things start with Road Goldberg Stanson rushing to get back, and we finally get an explanation regarding how to deal with the healing, the regeneration of the Holy Knights, and first of all Gabon says they aren't immortal, and we learn the key to solving this issue is Conqueror's Haki, so my mind immediately went back to Egghead, and once again it's back to Joyboy's Haki Blast. We saw how the elders reverted back to their human forms and retreated given this new information about how Conquerors is the way to go in this scenario. This clears up what happened back there, where to me it now looks like it's not that they simply retreated out of fear of Joyboy, but his Haki forced them out of their yokai forms, completely bypassing their healing or invulnerability, whatever you want to call it, and at that point, because of that Haki Blast, they couldn't do anything. It stopped them from going after the retreating Straw Hats and Giants, at which point their only option looked to be just returning to Marijwa. That's how I now view that scene. So it looks like while Luffy does have advanced Conquerors, he doesn't have complete control, he still needs to refine it, which makes sense. Carrying on, Loki is very confident in his own power as well, saying he knows he can beat them based on the interaction he had with Gunko and Shamrock when he was still chained up, and I 100% believe him. Gabon also knows Luffy isn't the only member of the crew who has Conqueror's Haki. Of course, we know that other person to be Zoro, even though he himself is oblivious to the fact. I think he has noticed a difference in himself, but he just didn't specifically attribute that growth to awakening Conquerors. But it is cool to see how Luffy knew Zoro had it, showing how far his own Haki has come. He said Zoro's been leaking Conquerors, so it does sound like he just didn't recognize it for what it is. It's funny how Gabon scolds him as well, like even in his current condition, he still got enough energy to tell Zoro off. And another mention of Luffy being an emperor, we do love that. Yeah, the biggest thing to come out of this is that when Gabon spoke, Sanji thought he was the one Gabon meant, and while this does add some more fuel to the fire because agendas have to agend, I do see this as like the first hint at Sanji down the line really awakening his own Conquerors, and I would very much like that. And the prerequisite of having kingly ambitions, I think it's broad enough that his dream of finding the All Blue falls into that category, because it's never been done before. Its existence itself is up in the air, just like the One Piece, so it is a wild ambition, a colossal goal to achieve. So Sanji becoming a conqueror, I am all for it. Hirudin is still refusing to free Loki, and Luffy's response to that is asking Loki to join his crew. This way Loki would then become Hirudin's direct superior as a member of the Grand Fleet, and it would force Hirudin's hand, so this isn't a genuine offer. How would it even work? The Thousand Sunny is 56 meters tall, so about 3 times the height of a regular giant, but Loki being the size of Oars, an ancient giant, so around 60 to 70 meters, you can see the problem. He isn't going to join the Straw Hats, especially when everyone else is unanimously disagreeing with Luffy's decision here. I wonder though if in theory they all agreed with Luffy, would Hirudin have freed him then, or would he remain steadfast and disobey his Grand Captain, his big boss? And it's interesting to see Hirudin's reaction anyway though, since he can tell Luffy trust Loki, which while it's far from being enough to make Hirudin trust his brother, it is a small step in that direction. So Zoro, Sanji and Hirudin's crew begin to make their way up to the Sun World, leaving Hirudin himself, Loki and Luffy down below still, as well as Gerd and Chopper, so they can keep tending to Loki Loki and Gaban respectively. So it looks like they are going to get a piece of the action first, although I don't know how much of it we'll see, since given how the chapter ends, we are going to be moving away from this for an extended period of time, and when we return you would assume these three as well will also make their way up. And moving on to the stuff I am most hyped for, even more so than the emu stuff if I'm being honest, and I'll explain that in a second. Gaban asks for Loki to be freed, and it was 113 giants that he mowed down according to Hyrudin, but then Gaban says that he and Shanks were present on Elbaph 14 years ago on the fateful day when Harald was killed, but they didn't see the whole incident play out with their own eyes. So the emu stuff is really cool, really interesting, but the reason why I love this and the rest of this chapter more than that stuff is because this is the context. These are the pieces of the puzzle that give us the bigger picture of Elbaph, just like how later down the line when we do learn more about Emu and get more flashbacks, that stuff will change the way we look at Emu here. It's that recontextualization that makes me so excited right now. So 14 years ago, Shanks is 39 right now. So he was 25 back then, Luffy is 19 now, and he was 6 when Shanks lost his arm and gave him the straw hat, so that was 13 years ago. So Shanks was on Elbaph only 1 year before Luffy's fateful day, you could call it. And now Loki obliges and begins to tell the tale of what happened that day. So into the flashback, the first flashback of the chapter, we go back to 14 years ago, where we see Loki going into the castle alongside Jarl, and they seem to be very amicable towards each other. Doesn't look like they are harboring any ill will at this point. Loki is a bit taller than Jarl here, so he was definitely still growing at this point in time. In human years, he would have been around 16, 17 years old back then, and they were both summoned by Harald, so factoring in this blunder he made, I think he was gonna tell them something he wasn't supposed to, which is why what we see happen later happens. And from the way the other giants are talking, it sounds like Loki had been away for a while by this point, and since we see him jumping down, I'm gonna say he was in the heaven world, but what he was doing there, no clue. And his intention is to ask his father why he had aligned with the world government, the ones who killed Rox D. Zebek. So that's the first clear-cut confirmation he was in one form or another working alongside them, and for now I'm sticking with the idea that he was only aligned with the world government with purely good intentions in mind, his own naivety, idealism. And second, Loki says they killed Rox, so we know in the present almost everything to do with him has been struck from the record, but back then, at the time of the incident, it was stated by Sengoku that there were news reports of the Rox pirates being wiped out with some world government propaganda sprinkled in, so I'm assuming that's how Loki caught wind of what happened. That news reached his ears. So if that is how he found out, it's ironic how he was fed false information, because of course there's more to Rox and God Valley still yet to be uncovered, and he himself was imprisoned thanks to accusations based on false information. Jarl and Loki do have an argument over what's best for the country, maintaining peace or retaining their warrior culture, and I kind of feel bad for Jarl here, because you can tell Loki is the kind of guy who would have a very stubborn way of thinking. He didn't care at all what Jarl was saying here. We see him and Jarl arriving at the throne room where he slammed a giant into the door to open it, so I guess even if he didn't kill his father, he still was a troublemaker, as we've been told before. But before that, from where I'm standing, it looks like the god was acting very suspiciously, like he was trying to stall for time, and upon entering, they found Harald stabbed through by his own guards, his own men. Although for now, I'm going to hold off from saying Emu used dummy reversi, because even though I still think they did, I don't think there's anything in this image clear enough to suggest that just now, because those points coming out of him are just a part of his outfit that we've seen before, and his mustache. And the thing with the horns is that I think only the giants who had horns to begin with, or horned helmets, grew the larger demonic horns, because Dory doesn't have them, but instead the spikes on his helmet grew larger. So since Harald ripped his horns out, I don't think he would have grown the demonic ones had he been dummy reversied. So since there are still a few unclear details, I'm gonna hold off on saying Harald was dummy reversied just for the time being. But either way, not knowing the full picture, Loki killed every last one of those giants after he saw them kill his father, with Jarl being caught in the crossfire. So let's say no one was dummy reversied here. Back to the idea of Harald potentially spilling secrets he wasn't supposed to. What if the world government spread a lie amongst the castle that day, which shattered Harald's image in the minds of the gods? They planted the idea of him being a traitor in their heads, which is why they killed him, and also why that god at the door was acting suspicious, because they didn't want Loki or Jarl finding out. Maybe another god did direct them in Harald's direction before, so maybe not all of them were in on this, but I think it still works, and I'll continue with this when we get back to this part in the chapter. And away from the castle, we do see Shanks and Gabon in a bath at Gabon's house, and look at that. Shanks has the mark of the abyss on his left arm. That circular tattoo, it does look noticeably different to what we've seen before on Summers, for example, but there's surely nothing else this could be. And getting the obvious out of the way first, revisiting the moment when Shanks lost his arm to the Lord of the Coast, the plot hole has been filled surrounding how he should have easily been able to use either hockey or avoid the bite entirely to keep his arm. He let it get bitten off, and from where I'm sitting, it doesn't at all affect what he said to Whitebeard about betting it on the new era, especially when a part of the conversation has Gabon telling Shanks that he is a child of destiny. So that needs a lot of unpacking, but first, him losing his arm was much more than just getting rid of that mark. I'd say it was a part of him playing his role in the bigger picture of the One Piece world. So Shanks is the chosen one then. My mind goes back to Luffy because obviously he's Luffy. Gear 5, Nika fruit, it was a big point of discussion back then. Although it's pretty clear that none of this would have been possible if Luffy wasn't Luffy. If he didn't have his charisma, personality, mindset, then he wouldn't have gotten this far. Anyway, do you think that's what Roger told Shanks after returning from Laugh Tale, that he had this massive role to play in the future? So him being destined would mean something closer to him being tasked with this heavy burden, a role that was placed on him because Roger and maybe Gabon and Rayleigh as well saw him to be fit for the job, setting him on this path, and that's why he didn't go after the One Piece straight away. He had a role to fulfill, and that separated him from Buggy, which is also brought up here. So it does work like the old idea of Shanks being the guardian or gatekeeper to Laugh Tale or something, not literally, but he's helped in setting the pieces up on our side of the board, and that culminated in Gear 5 in the Awakening, because once that had happened, his job was done, which is why he is now going after the One Piece as well himself. They also talk about when they met Dory and Brogy on Little Garden, and that's the first time it's been explicitly stated, so it should be crystal clear that those two were the old friends Shanks was talking about in chapter 1076, although Gabon himself still does fit the category as well. Ripley is also here holding a baby Colin, who's like 6 years old here, 2 in human years, and now that I think about it, it means that scene in the bar wasn't their first meeting. And he also mentions how he met Harold and he wanted to meet him again. That's more evidence to suggest Harold was a truly good person. I would narrow down the time frame to be after he formed his own crew, and that day 14 years ago, so we know he recruited Yasop first 22 years ago, and the crew was complete or mostly complete 19 years ago, since we saw them all when they found Uta, because remember that is canon. He said they met in Marijua, which is crazy because that reopens the possibility that it was Shanks who met with the elders and not Shamrock. Also, why was he there at this point in time? You'd guess he was allowed in because he still is technically a celestial dragon. I also believe that was part of what Roger told him. This was the main thing that made him cry, the fact that he is one of those hateful celestial dragons. And for some reason it's weird to think about Harold, a giant, being there as well at Marijua. It just doesn't seem right, maybe because we've heard so much about how Elbaf was strong enough to keep them at bay, but also just picturing Harold there in the courtyard, for example, that we saw at the Reverie, it just doesn't fit. But because of where they were, Marijua, they couldn't talk freely, but we know Shanks wasn't able to tell him what he wanted to say because back in the castle, Harold did lose his life, and back to the theory of the world government or a government agent tricking the castle guards, someone closed the castle gates, trapping them inside with an infinitely pissed off Loki, so this definitely sounds like it was a setup by the world government, at least to me. And add to that, we cut to the country's legendary devil fruit, which is stolen by a mysterious figure. First I thought it would be someone connected to Loki and they gave it to him afterwards, Mosa for example, but I doubt it, especially since I think she's a slave in Marijua, so that wouldn't really work. Unless, and this is very speculative, it was Mosa who stole the fruit and somehow got it to Loki, and maybe some people from the world government were also there on that day, then they captured her, enslaved her, took her back to Marijua. But then I thought I could connect this to my theory of the world government orchestrating this event in the castle and say a government agent stole it, and then I came across this theory online, one part of which I do like, the rest I'm kind of indifferent to at this moment. It suggests that Elbaph's legendary fruit passed down through the ages was Luffy's Nika fruit, and it was a government agent who stole it and replaced replaced it, and then we know who was transporting it, most likely to Marijua before Shanks stole it. And the timeline matches up really nicely because we now know he was on Elbaph 1 year before he went to Windmill Village, and the rest is history. That does leave the issue of what the replacement fruit would be, why they replaced it at all. This theory says it was done in an effort to control Loki, which could connect to them trying to recruit him earlier in the arc. There are some more details to go over, but it's that first bit which caught my eye about who stole the fruit and why, and that serves as a very nice extension to my initial theory. One thing is that I do still want to believe Loki has the destroyer variant of the Nika fruit, since we know about the conflicting views on who Nika truly was, so people could have desired to be both versions of him, Liberator, which is Luffy's fruit, or Destroyer. And the chapter ends with us going even further back in time to 109 years ago, 7 years before Dory and Brogy's duel began, when Kureha was only 32 years old, in a human kingdom on another island. Finally, the Elbaf flashback begins, and the narrator is speaking my language by saying that this is a time when the giant pirates were what everyone feared the most. We see the great Eric, younger Dory and Brogy, so they've already become the co-captains of the giant warrior pirates. Oimo and Kashi are there too, but there's another ship, and the narrator continues to say there's another reason why Elbaf is synonymous with terror, because a young Harald is also here, and he is just a horrible guy. He's got Loki's build, and it looks like he's got the personality of a younger Loki as well. Looks like he went through a few stages in his life: a dick, a good person, a pacifist, maybe even a traitor, or maybe just naive, but we will find out very soon. And he is already king here at 45 years old, so 15 years old in human years. Is that important? Is there a bigger reason why he became king so young, or did things just turn out that way? And he would have been 154 years old in the present, which would make him 6 years younger than Dory and Brogy, who are 160 in the present, so 49 here, which is coincidentally the same age Loki was on the day Harald died. But this makes me want to see those three interact, since they're all basically the same age. Were they friends? How close were they? What was the young king's relationship with the young co-captains of the giant warrior pirates, who, if the present is anything to go by, are treated like kings? Although, like I said, it's only 7 years before Dory and Brogy's duel begins, so we're not going to see very much of them in this flashback, unless they receive a lot of focus in this early part. So this is just what I was hoping for. It starts all the way back with Harald in his youth, so we can work our way forward to the present from there, instead of starting with Loki. This way we can see Harald's personality, his mindset, how he lived. We can see how he met Hyrudin's mother, what happened to her. There's a theory that she is Mosa anyway. We can see Hyrudin himself growing up as the illegitimate son, then maybe a connection to Big Mom's time on the island, then to the Loki stuff, his birth, his mother's death, Loki growing up, Harald meeting Shanks, Harald's death, Loki's imprisonment, and everything in between, all the way up to the present. And when I lay it all out like that, it's insane how much has already been set up for this flashback, almost entirely based on stuff we've learned in this arc across only 25 or so chapters, and it's finally time to see it all play out. I have never been as hyped for a flashback as this one, and it's only the second major flashback that I'm reading weekly since I caught up in Act 3 of Wano, and my first weekly flashback was, in my opinion, the best in the entire story, so it does have a tough act to follow. But first off, I really like where it's been placed, because right after it ends will come the big fight against Emu, so this should make that huge fight even more fulfilling with some added context, and I don't care how long this lasts. I remember with Kuma's backstory, some people thought it went on too long as it released weekly. I didn't. Let this flashback run for as many chapters as are necessary, and I will be there for every single one of them.